أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. These last 6-7 days that I've been with you, we've been speaking about the topic of decision making from an Islamic perspective. I'll quickly just recap what we've talked about so we can find a place of our current discussion. We began speaking about the faculty of free will, the free choice that we have that allows us to make those decisions in our life. Then we looked at some of the tools that we have to make those decisions. We have the tool of knowledge that we have to acquire, of the goals of life, the laws and the parameters by which we're supposed to live our life. We looked at certain ways that we can gain that knowledge through consultation with people who have more experience and wisdom than us. And through istikhara, by seeking Allah's help for the best, and then as a last resort to do the istikhara that is very familiar to many people, where you open the Quran and use a subha to make a decision when all else fails, when nothing else works. Then we turned our attention to look at certain difficult decisions of life, to see what Islamic guidelines we could find to make those decisions better. One area of life was marriage, and then yesterday we looked at career choices. Today I want to turn our attention to another area that's often, it's one of those major life decisions that we have to make, and it's often a decision that's made not necessarily with the right criteria in mind, and for that reason sometimes we end up making the wrong choices. And that is the decision about where to live, our place of residence. It seems like a very simple kind of a thing. It seems more like maybe a topic for a real estate agent. But there's Islamic guidance that we can also gain, and when you think about it, this is a really important thing, because where we live it plays such a huge role in so much of our life, our lifestyle, our neighbors, our friends, our connection with the Muslim community. These are extremely important factors in our life, and those are in large part determined by where we choose to live. So we want to think about some of the considerations that are important when we are choosing a place to live. First of all, most important is location. Location. Right? Choosing the right place is the key to finding the right place to live. In particular, there's certain things we should keep in mind. One is, in terms of location, we should be very conscious about who our neighbors are. If we don't have, Islam puts a huge premium on maintaining good relations and positive and strong relations with neighbors, whether or not they're Muslim. Right, this is one of those things. We have certain Islamic rules that apply to Muslim and non-Muslim alike. Kindness and respect for parents is a rule that's imposed on us, regardless of whether your parents are believers or not believers, good or bad, whatever they might be, whatever their choices are. That respect that's due to them because they're your parents it's a blanket statement, a blanket rule. Neighbors also the same way. Whether our neighbors are Muslim or non-Muslim, because they are our neighbors, for the very fact that they are neighbors, they have rights over us, and we have obligations and responsibilities to them. And there are lots of hadith that encourage us to be, that not only encourage, they require us to be outstanding neighbors to our neighbors, whether or not they reciprocate, right? There's one hadith I want to share with you from Luqman. And Luqman al-Hakim, most likely not a prophet, according to our scholars, they don't consider him a prophet, but he's a wise man. He's mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Luqman. And we have lots of hadith that quote the wisdom that he dispensed to his son. So in one of these statements he says, Ya bunayya, al-jar thumma ad-dar. Al-jar thumma ad-dar. He says, first choose your neighbors, then choose your house. That's rarely how we go about it, right? We call up the real estate agent and we tell him we want a this many bedroom house and this price range and this kind of finish and whatever else we tell him. Maybe we'll say, in this particular, city or suburb, because the taxes are this way or because the schools are that way, and we'll think about those things. But how about actually going and seeing what kind of neighborhood it is? Meeting the neighbors, seeing what the environment is like, the local playground, what kind of playground are your kids going to be playing in? Who are the kids who are the other kids who frequent that playground? Right, so that's the advice that Luqman gives to his son. Al-jar thumma ad-dar. First look at the neighbors and the neighborhood. Choose that first, and then you can pick a house that fits those criteria that you have within that neighborhood that's outstanding. Likewise, he says, Ar-rafiq thumma at-tariq. When you're planning a trip, instead of first making your itinerary, buying your ticket, and doing all this, he says first choose who you're going to travel with, then you decide where you're going to go. First the rafiq, first your companion, choose that first, and then you choose where you're going to go. Then you decide in your itinerary. Right? Because who you're going to travel with plays such a huge role in the quality of your travel, the quality of the conversation, whether how well you're able to maintain your Islamic duties, your prayers, and guard yourself against haram and all this stuff. A friend, a good friend, a righteous friend can help you to stay on the right path in all those ways. Then he says, يا بني لو كانت البيوت على العمد ما جاور رجل جار سوء أبدا. If we had the choice, if it was fully our choice to choose our neighbors, of course we would never choose a bad neighbor. Right? So he says, make that your choice. You do have that choice. Take that as the option and choose based on who your neighbors are going to be, and then and only then choose whether or not that house is going to be appropriate for you. So that's one consideration in terms of location. You want to look at the neighborhood to make sure that that's a good place for you to be in and for your children to be in. Another really important factor that may not be so relevant just yet, but inshallah it will be soon in your community here, and that is proximity to a mosque. That is such an important factor in choosing where you're going to live. First of all, let me clarify. Legally, there is a difference, Islamically, there is a difference between what we have here, the center that we have here, as a rental facility that we've kind of made temporarily as a place that we can gather and do certain activities, versus a true mosque. Islamic law has a special place for the masjid. A masjid is a piece of property with some construction on it that is now made as an endowment, a waqf, that is turned, it no longer belongs to anybody. It doesn't belong to any individual or any organization. It now belongs to Allah. Whoever owns it turns it over and makes the intention that I hereby make this property, this building, whatever's on it, into a waqf, meaning I turn it over to Allah. So now it doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to Allah, and you, as a trustee or as a board of trustees, then you manage it, because of course Allah doesn't manage things, He expects us to do the managing. So we'll manage it in a way that's appropriate and all this stuff, but it no longer belongs to anyone. So nobody can call the shots. No individual can say, I donated this mosque, so now I can say whatever I want to say. No, it now belongs to all the Muslims, right? And the Muslims as a community, then they then govern it in the best possible way. That mosque then has certain benefits and certain responsibilities that are placed on the community or on the trustees. A mosque, for instance, the reward that we get for praying in a mosque is greater than the reward we get for praying anywhere else. So as soon as a place is designated as a mosque, your reward for praying there is multiplied. So that's a huge benefit of praying in a mosque as opposed to praying in a place like this, which is just a center. Right? That doesn't have to just be a Shia, like a mosque that's been kind of created by Shia. Right? Sunnis, our Sunni brothers who've created mosques, those also are mosques. Legally, they are mosques. They have all the same rules as mosques. You get the same reward. In fact, we have a hadith from the Imam. There's one hadith I remember from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. where he encourages us to go and pray in the mosques of our Sunni brethren. And he says, he offers this kind of reward. Just listen to the reward. He says, if you go, anyone who prays in the mosque of our mukhalifin, that's the term, the code word that they would use for people who are not Shi'i. Anyone who goes and prays in the mosques of the mukhalifin, the reward that they get will be like the reward of someone praying in the mosque of the Prophet, with the Prophet as the Imam, in the first row to the right of the first row. It's the best possible place you could ever be, in the best situation you could possibly be. If you ever think of any jama'ah, it's the best jama'ah you could be in. Right? The best possible jama'ah, he offers that kind of reward for doing this. The wisdom behind this is obvious, but it's good to state it as well and restate it. That he wants us, they want us to be in constant interaction with everyone. Don't ghettoize ourselves. Right? We shouldn't be kind of hidden away, tucked away in a corner where nobody even knows we exist. We should be interacting with people. We should be out there. One of the reasons why traditionally in many of these kind of Muslim communities in the old world, many of the places where you or your parents have come from, one of the reasons why Sunnis typically accuse the Shia of not even praying is because they never see us praying. They never see us praying because we don't show up in their mosques and pray. So they might have you as a Shia neighbor, and you never show up at the neighborhood mosque. And so they say, well, obviously, he must not pray then. Or they show up at a Shia mosque right at the beginning of Asr time, and they see it's empty because we've probably already prayed at Dhuhr time, which is fine. That's not a problem. But my point is that when they accuse us, part of it's out of ignorance or out of malevolence, but part of it's our fault as well, because we are not interacting enough with them. We're not making that step and taking that step to go and interact with them, pray with them, be in their masajid, and all of that. And that's something that they want us to do. So this is the way they do it. One of the things we find with the Ahlul Bayt, whenever they want to establish some institution and push us in a certain way, they dangle a carrot there. That's why we have all these rewards that are offered for this and that. It's not just arbitrary. They just want to offer rewards for any old thing. They find those things that are very significant, that will make a difference in our life and our lifestyles and the movement of Islam, and they dangle carrots there and say, if you do such and such, you get this much reward. Because they want us to go in that direction, and they know that we're basically self-interested. We want to do what's in our best interest, so they give us our best interest there. So they'll give you lots of reward if you go and pray with the Sunnis. Now there's certain rules for that, depending on the masjid that you follow. Like for say Sistani, at least you can't, when you pray with them, you don't pray with the intention that you're praying in jama'ah. So you put on the show, kind of on the surface, you're praying in jama'ah, but actually you're just praying furada. Right? So because one of the conditions for the imam al-jama'ah is he has to be Shi'i. And he has to be just, a righteous person. So if you're praying in a Sunni, a place where the imam is not a Shi'i, obviously you can't pray behind him as those congregation. So it's for show that you're in congregation, and it has all those benefits, the social benefits, those intra-faith benefits that are there, those are also there. But legally, we also want to make sure that we're praying correctly, so we pray with the intention as furada, and we just make sure we coordinate it so it looks like we're praying in jama'ah. Right? So, and depending on the marja you follow, some of the marja do allow you to pray behind a Sunni imam, so you have to just check your marja taqleed's fatwa and see what's the right way to do it. But everyone agrees that this is good, that we should pray with them. It's just a matter of how to do that. So that's about the difference between a mosque and a center. There are also certain rules and restrictions that come with a mosque. So for instance, in certain states of spiritual impurity, both men and women are not allowed in a mosque. Right? I'll leave it at that. Right? But there are certain rules then. In a center, those rules don't apply. Right? But in a mosque, then they apply, so that has to also be taken into account. In the designing of the mosque, oftentimes, for instance, the women's section will be designed in such a way where it's divided, so the women who can't enter the mosque, they'll be in one area, and those who can enter the mosque can be in another area. So they have a special place for themselves. They know it's marked, so they know where they can't go and where they can go, and so forth. So those things have to be taken into account when we design a mosque. If we look at we have two historical precedents I just want to mention. One is the prophets, Right, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
If we look at the way he established himself in Medina as soon as he came there, right? He stopped in Quba. We know before he came into Medina, right? If those of you who have been to Medina or have read about it and seen the pictures, you'll recognize the name of Masjid Quba. Right, so Masjid Quba was the first mosque that was built in Medina. The Prophet waited there when he did the hijrah, when he came from Mecca to Medina. He waited in Quba until Imam Ali caught up with him, because he had left Imam Ali. Of course, he slept in his bed that night to give kind of a subterfuge to the Meccans so that the Prophet could escape. Imam Ali stayed in his bed, was nearly killed, and would have gladly been killed if that would have meant that the Prophet would be safe. And once he was found out and beaten up and all of that, then his task was to make sure that he closed all the Prophet's accounts, returned all of the amanat. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addu al-amanati ila ahliha. Allah commanded the Prophet, commands us to make sure that we fulfill and return all trust to their rightful owners. And to the Prophet, as Al-Amin, he had all of these, he was the bank of Mecca. He had all of these trusts that people had given him. He couldn't kind of make a big show and say, okay, everyone who has, let's close all your accounts, because then that would let the Meccans know what he was about to do. So he kept all those amanat, handed them over to Imam Ali and gave him the task of returning all of those things to the rightful people, and then of bringing the Fawatim with him to Medina. Fawatim is the term that's used for the Fatimas of the family. Of course, Fatima Zahra, Fatima bint Asad, and a couple of other Fatimas that we had in the family of the Ahlul Bayt. And his job was to bring those women of the Prophet's family to Medina safely. Once he came, then the Prophet, along with Imam Ali from Quba, entered into Medina. And that's when we know the whole story about his camel, using his camel to make the decision of where to stay so he wouldn't offend anyone in the city. And he chooses where the masjid of the Prophet is now. But one of the things that he does then is he founds the Masjid of Quba, and then in Medina is the Prophet's mosque. That's the first thing he does. Even before thinking about where am I going to live, which neighborhood which suburb am I going to settle down in, and all these things, his first thought is, what's the best place to build a mosque? And so that's one of the things that he did, and we see that's an encouragement that he has as well. That should be one of our first thoughts as well. MashaAllah, we have you're a growing community. You've grown very fast from what I've heard and what I've seen. I saw when it didn't exist, when this community didn't exist some years ago, and now all of a sudden, even when they ask me where I'm going, and I said Charlotte, they said, Charlotte has a community? And MashaAllah, you've grown so fast that it's kind of been under the radar.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And that's great. You can use this momentum. You have a responsibility to use this momentum to now move forward and move past this temporary place and do whatever you can to find a permanent place. Thoughtfully, right? A place that can be attended by the most people, that can be as public as possible, where you can have that outreach activity, where you can be proud of your place, where there's a sign in the front instead of right now you have a sign in the back, right? Where when you pass by, it looks like an abandoned place right now. From the front, there's no indication what activity is going on here. When you come around to the back, there's a little sign that says Az-Zahra Islamic Center, right? Until when you come really close and kind of squint your eyes, then you see it. Right? That's not very good PR. Maybe there's some reasons, legal reasons, whatever, that you're doing that, but that's certainly not ideal. Right? People should know. Your neighbors definitely should know. The local churches and all should know that this is the place the Muslims gather. It should be such a place that you can be proud of it, and you can invite people over, and go and have this sort of interaction with them, and bring them to the mosque and be proud of this area. Okay, another precedent that we have, I talked about the Prophet's precedent, how he established the mosque first. Musa alayhi salam and Prophet Harun alayhi salam, they also, as soon as they had a little bit of freedom from Pharaoh, right? This happens right after the contest, the big Eid, the day when there's a contest between Pharaoh's magicians and Moses and Aaron. They win, right? The magicians admit defeat, they immediately prostrate before Allah, and they face the wrath of Pharaoh, and they're all executed. All 80 or so of them are executed. But because of that huge fiasco for Pharaoh, all of a sudden he loses credibility, he loses some grip on the people of Egypt, and that allows a little bit of freedom for Moses and his movement. And so one of the things that Allah commands him to do during that period, I read a little bit from God's emissaries. He says, God told Moses and his brothers, settle your people in the city, and let your houses face each other, and maintain the prayer, and give good news to the faithful. This command gave Moses the inspiration to take practical steps toward organizing his people as a free and functioning society. They moved close together and built their houses so that their doors faced one another, thereby facilitating easy communication and commerce among themselves. They built a place of worship and gathered regularly for prayers there. So the very first thing, the way to build a community is to build a mosque. The way to build a community is to move close together. To have your houses, where your neighbors now, we're supposed to choose our neighbors first. Why not choose our neighbors and strategically move together so all your neighbors are your community members? It's a huge move. It's a huge, moving is no joke, right? But if it's done together as a community and you make a conscious decision, especially once you make a mosque, maybe one of the wisdoms behind Allah creating this institution of the mosque, which is now a waqf, which can never be sold, by the way. You can never sell a mosque. Once you make it, that's it until the Day of Judgment. Right? So one of the wisdoms behind that is that now you have an anchor. Because right now, probably in the back of your minds, you're all thinking, well, this center it's a rental, it's temporary anyway. I'm not going to move close to this because who knows if we're going to stay here past the next lease, the end of the next lease. Right? And that's the nature of a rental, that's the nature of a temporary place. You don't know, and you're not going to uproot your life and move it for the sake of something temporary. But once it's a mosque, then you know that, okay, well, it's here. So now I can make my plans, and I can move close, get a new job, or figure out a way to anchor my life around this place. Because now I know it's going to stay forever. Right? So that's one of the wisdoms behind having this sort of system. We see that Moses did that. Right? One of the things you can finally do then, I think how important prayer is. I don't know if certainly we don't. Myself included, we don't understand exactly how important prayer is. Not only for our own connection with Allah, that's of course one important part of it. Our individual relationship with Allah. But if you notice the huge emphasis that Allah places on congregational prayer, it's not just between me and Allah. And nothing in Islam is really like, well, I won't say nothing, but very little in Islam is like that, where it's just about, that's kind of the way that religion has been, kind of sidelined in mainstream American culture, is by making it, that separation of church and state has been taken to such an extent that it's even separation of my real life from my religious life. Religious life in mainstream American culture is one little aspect of what you do. It's what you do when you're alone, and it's just between you and God. It's your private conversation with God. That's religion. The rest of it's life. Right? So my relationship with you is not religion. My relationship with my work and my family and my service and all the different things that I do, that's not religion. Religion is just that very small area of my life where I worship my Lord, or choose not to, as the case may be. Right? Where Islam says absolutely that's not the case at all. Life is religion. Religion is part of every little aspect of life. Every single part of your life, every decision that you make, every thought that you have, every single action, every human action has a law associated with it. That's how pervasive the Sharia is. Every single action is either permissible or not permissible. Breathing, as fundamental as breathing, as either it has a law associated with it. It's a wajib to breathe, right? And to that extent, that's how we think of it, of religion and Islam. That's the role of Islam, that it pervades every single aspect of our life. So congregational prayer is one of those indications that tells us that religion, and prayer in particular, worship, is not an individual activity that happens between you and your Lord in the seclusion of some privacy. It is, in its ideal form, a way to Now interact with people. I just think of the benefits. Well, first of all, so it's another place where Allah dangles those carrots. Right? He offers not only more reward in a masjid than any other place, He offers more reward for praying in congregation than for praying furada, praying by yourself. So, from what I remember, the hadith, they mentioned the number 25, that a prayer in congregation is worth 25 times more than a prayer furada. To the extent, if you think of the emphasis that's placed on praying fi awwal al-waqt, al-waqt al-fadila, the best time of each prayer, that's in its own place. It's very good. It's highly recommended to pray your prayers right in the beginning of the time, and that's best time, the prime time of the prayer, not to delay it and pray it, hours afterwards. However, one exception to that is if by delaying your prayer, like what we do here, right? Prayer time right now is what, 6:30 or so? But we delay our prayer. But we delay our prayer all the way till 7:15, right? And our justification for that is that's the time when people can make it. And on a weekend, it's not such an issue. But on weekdays, I was told that that's the time that people can make it from work and their schedules and things like that. So instead of everyone praying furada at home, at the first time, we delay it for 45 minutes. We all pray together in jama'ah here, and the prayer is now worth more. That's encouraged. We're not doing something wrong by delaying it. Ideally, if we could pray on time in jama'ah, that would be the best, of course. But if we have to wait into praying furada at the first time versus praying jama'ah a little later, praying jama'ah wins. That's how important jama'ah is. As important as prayer is, jama'ah is even more important than that. And what's the benefit in jama'ah that so much emphasis is put on it, that the mosque is so important? So some of the benefits of this. First of all, if you think about it, the quality of our prayer goes up. Not only the reward is that's Allah is doing, but even I found myself personally that the quality of my prayer goes up when I'm praying in a group. Not just because of riyah. Riyah, inshallah, we're safe from that. Not because I want to show off in front of you. But for instance, if I'm praying by myself, for instance, maybe I'm in a rush, and so I kind of just do the wajibat, I just to get the prayer off so I can check it off and get back to other things that are also important. Right? That's the reality of life. Sometimes we're in that sort of situation and we pray fast to get back to something else. Or we leave out mustahabbat. Right? Or we might, those kinds of things. So our prayer, the quality of the prayer sometimes is compromised, and it depends really on my motivation. If I'm able to, if I'm inspired, then I'll pray with more enthusiasm. If I'm not inspired, then just kind of get it done, just to fulfill my duty. But as soon as you're in a jama'ah, all of a sudden everything gets equalized a little bit. Even if I feel a little bit down, a little bit tired, a little bit uninspired, the jama'ah kind of has a life of its own, and we follow the imam. The imam leads the prayer, and you end up having to kind of slow things down a little bit. You end up having to, the norm is to kind of do at least the medium level of mustahabbat, those recommended acts. Whereas you might have cut corners by yourself, when you're in the jama'ah, you have to go along with the group. So the quality of the prayer itself improves. And as soon as you slow down, that allows opportunity for us now to think. Whereas when you're saying the prayers fast, usually we're not thinking too much, we're just trying to get it done. Then all of a sudden you have a little bit of chance to think about the meaning of the phrases, about the meaning of the actions of the prayer and so forth. So the quality of the prayer increases when we do jama'ah prayer, and that's one of the reasons why it's encouraged. It also, it's a way for us to socialize. This is, other communities have other ways of socializing. They might have alcohol to socialize over, and sports games, and other kinds of activities that they have mutual interest in, and they use those as a way to get to know one another. One of the kernels of the community that Allah wants us to use as a way to socialize is the prayer, the jama'ah prayer. When you start coming on a daily basis, every maghrib, every isha, every fajr, you start seeing the same people. You have quick conversations here and there, you exchange numbers, you get to know each other. You see someone's not there, they've been there consistently, and now all of a sudden they're not there, so you get concerned, you call them up, you see what's wrong, maybe they're in trouble. All of a sudden you have such interesting and meaningful relationships that are building, where it's not seasonal, the way most likely it is in your community, because usually that's the way things start out. It's seasonal during Muharram, more people come, during Ramadan more people come, but then maybe it's not on a regular basis. But in jama'ah prayer, when that becomes important and a mainstay of the community, then on a daily basis you're seeing these people. That gives opportunity for socializing, for community building then. All right, so those are some of the benefits of Jama'ah prayer, and highlights the importance. It highlights the importance of having a masjid. And remember what we're talking about. We're talking about where to live, and the whole idea was one of the considerations I should have is I want to live close to a masjid. Now, how close to a masjid? Right, close is relative. Sometimes over here, if you're 45 minutes away, you might think you're close because there are people from Greenville and Columbia and Raleigh. They come for hundreds of miles to come to attend today. So you might think 45 minutes is pretty close. That's not really close though. Right, close is close enough to be able to pray Jama'ah prayer. That's the radius we're looking at. Practically, that's going to be like a few miles. You don't want to spend more than 5-10 minutes in the car going to the masjid. Otherwise, it becomes a hassle to go. Right. So that's the kind of radius you're looking for when you're thinking about how close to live to the masjid. Okay. So we're talking about where the proximity to the masjid is important. Another consideration is affordability. And of course we know that anyone who's gone into looking for a house, they have an idea about what they can afford and stuff like that. But I want to put an Islamic twist on it as well to highlight just how important that is to be very careful and realistic when we're looking at the pricing of our house and what kind of lifestyle that kind of house is going to bring for us. Because that's going to again determine so much about the quality of our life. That choice that we make can potentially make or break us for the next 15 to 30 years, depending on what kind of loan you take, right? If you end up being, if you don't think about this, and you buy the house of your dreams because you can, because the system of mortgage and borrowing allows you to buy more than you can possibly more than you can afford, right? It allows you. Borrowing necessarily allows you to spend more than you can afford. It's more than the cash that you have on hand. I can now borrow and then spread that out for 30 years, pay a lot more in the long run, but in the short term it's more manageable, and so I can do it. If you do it though, what happens? If you buy a house that's bigger than what you need, bigger than what you can afford, outside of your means, then you enter a rat race. Now you have mortgage payments that are huge, perhaps a majority of your income on a monthly basis. You have taxes that are very high. You don't realize that when you look at the price of a house. You may not realize that, there are taxes also that are factored, or that need to be factored into it, that aren't. And so all of a sudden, a huge chunk of your salary is decreased. And then the utilities. A big house has to be heated and air conditioned. All of a sudden, those prices increase. So suddenly, a huge chunk of your livelihood is sucked up by this house. You now become not the proud new owner to be able to enjoy a house, but now a very high-paid servant of this house. There's an interesting hadith. This is from, I think it's from Imam Ali alayhi salam. Yeah, so he's quoting, he says, من كلامه تعالى, no, من كلامه من كلام أمير المؤمنين أوحى الله إلى الدنيا. So this is one of those hadith, it's personifying the dunya, so it could be real or it could be whatever, the message is what we're interested in. Allah spoke to the dunya, spoke to the temporal world, the world in which we live, and he said, من خدمني فاخدمي ومن خدمك فاستخدمي. من خدمني فاخدمي ومن خدمك فاستخدمي. Right, so he plays on this word khidma. Khidma means to serve. Khadim is a servant. Right, so Allah says to the dunya, anybody who serves me and is my servant, you also serve him. If he's my servant, then you are his servant. Serve him, help him. But if anyone serves you, then exploit him. You make him your servant. If anyone serves you, you make him your servant. Right? So as long as our perspective is correct and we use the dunya the way it's supposed to be used as a way to get to Allah, our service is to Allah, our attention, our focus is on Allah, and the dunya is just that's the place where we live. We have to take advantage and use it in a way as a stepping stone to get towards Allah, fulfill our duties. It's by the way. It's a means, not the end. Then that dunya is in our service. But as soon as this becomes the goal, and Allah now becomes something tangential, then we become servants of the dunya. Instead of the dunya being a servant for us, we now become slaves and servants of the dunya. And we now have to take care of that house. We're now spending all of our free time cleaning it, maintaining it, working our tails off. Not enough time left in the day because we have to earn enough money to be able to pay off that payment that's there over our heads for this house. By the time I'm done working, it's already dark and it's basically just time to sleep. And so it sounds ludicrous when you think about it, but sometimes that's the reality of our life if we don't make these decisions carefully in the first place. And our quality of life will be nothing that we ever dreamed of. The house will be beautiful, but our quality of life, which is what we really wanted to build in the first place, that will be shot. So that's a very important thing to think about, to make sure that the house itself and all the trappings of the house are affordable within our means. We're not ever living outside of our means. Otherwise, we end up as servants of the dunya instead of the dunya being a servant for us. Recite with salawat, please.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
A couple more points. One is in terms of size. And you might think I'm going to say, smaller is better. Not necessarily. And let's see if you agree that there's not a contradiction between what I just said, that we should make sure it's affordable within our means, and on the other hand, be realistic about size of the house. And we have recommendation and kind of input from Islamic guidance as well for this. Think of, for instance, the emphasis that Islam puts on hospitality, on being good to your guests, opening your house up to people who want to come and visit. Right, that's important, and that's going to require that our house be a little bit bigger than it would be just for my family, just for our own family. Right, so you have a guest room, you have a guest suite, something like that, where when people come over, you can open your house up to them comfortably and make them comfortable, make them feel good. That's an Islamic value, to have that kind of leeway. If you can, to either you have to sacrifice and kind of make room for your guests when they come, or you can go ahead and plan ahead of time, and if you have the wherewithal, you create a space that's devoted to guests, a guest room and those kinds of things for them to stay in. So that's something that's good, and we should think about that, and so we can feed into this Islamic value of hospitality, which is very important. Or going back to our parents, right? The emphasis that Islam puts on honoring and respecting our parents, it becomes wajib on us once our parents become unable to take care of themselves anymore. They now become the dependents of their children. Just like we were dependents of them for so many years before we finally stood on our own 2 feet. Now when they become unable to support themselves, it becomes wajib on the children, on their children, to now do whatever they can to take care of their parents. And that's also a consideration to have as you're buying your house, as you're making your house, as you're expanding and renovating your house, to think, how can I accommodate my parents in these living quarters, right? To have an in-law suite or whatever, different kinds of things like that, so that they can also live comfortably and be with you. Ironically, you might think, when I just kind of spoke about kind of buying an affordable place, there's a lot of emphasis on expanding and renovating and upgrading your house. Right, that's something that's encouraged as your financial ability increases, as it normally does. So sometimes we have pitfalls here and there, or kind of downturns here and there. But generally, right, you have an upward kind of trajectory in terms of your earning. As that increases, you have more children. We're encouraged to expand our house, whether either to buy a bigger house or to renovate and expand and that kind of thing. So one hadith that says this, عن أبي الحسن عليه السلام, this is Imam Rida عليه السلام.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
قال ينبغي للرجل أن يوسع على عياله. It's appropriate, it's good for a person to expand his house, right? In all those different ways, either by upgrading, by building on, by buying a new place, whatever it takes. But as your family grows, as your kids grow older, to expand, right? That's encouraged. And the reason he says, might sound kind of harsh, he says, كَيْ لَا يَتَمَنَّوْا مَوْتًا. So the children and the family, they don't start thinking and praying that hopefully he'll die soon. So at least if he's too stingy to spend on us while he's alive, at least through his will, we'll get that wealth and we'll be able to kind of live in a better way than we are now. It sounds very, very harsh, but that's something. He's not saying that's the right way to think, but he's saying that's sometimes the reality of how the dynamic works. If the parents are not generous and self-sacrificing with their children, and they're a little bit stingy with them, and the father, for instance, is not spending where he should be spending, but now he's either simply saving or he's spending where he shouldn't be spending outside of the family, being very generous with other people, hospitable with other people, but then tight-fisted with his own family, then it's gonna leave a bitterness with his family. They go, why is he nice to everyone else and he's not nice to us at home? And that's gonna leave its mark there. Right? So it's something that's important for us to realize that dynamic and do whatever we can. Whatever wealth we have to realize, we have to keep it in the forefront of our mind that we're simply conduits. The money's never ours. The danger of money is that we inevitably start thinking, if we're not careful, we start thinking that I earned this money. It's my money. That's the pitfall that Qarun fell into. Right? Qarun from Musa's story, he had all that wealth, and his infamous statement in Surah Al-Qasas is إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. I've been given all this wealth. It's so vast that the Quran describes it that just the key itself to open the treasury, much less the treasury itself, the key itself, it required several strong men to hold the key just to open the lock to the treasury. That's the way the Quran describes it, right? So he now says, after he's gathered all this wealth, he says, I earned this of my own my own knowledge. I had the skill, I had the knowledge, I worked hard, this is my money. And as soon as he starts thinking like that, what does Allah do? Cracks the earth open, swallows him up, buries him and his wealth along with him, destroys him. He was a righteous person. This is Qarun is touted as he was one of the Bani Israel. He was a Jew from the followers of Musa alayhi salam, a righteous person. He had been given the wealth in the first place because of his righteousness. That was one of the ways that Allah rewarded him by giving him this wherewithal. Not only wealth, but also power. He was one of the movers and shakers in Pharaoh's court. Despite the fact that he was a Jew, he was allowed in Pharaoh's court, and it seems like he was one of the movers and shakers there. So he had all of this given to him by Allah, but he fell into the trap of shaitan and started to think that it's all mine. I earned it. I can do whatever I want with it. And he forgot about the real source, which was Allah. Right, so my point is that we should constantly remind ourselves that whatever we have is from Allah. Yes, we worked hard for it. So in some cases not. But that our work is not the cause. We didn't create the money. We didn't create any of that. The tawfiq and the strength that Allah gave us in the first place is His. He gave it to us to be able to work. He's the one who gave us the opportunity. He's the one who helps us to find those jobs that are lucrative and profitable. Right? So if we recognize Him as the source, then it'll be much easier to spend. We'll be much more eager not to hoard. We'll realize that hoarding is really just stopping Allah from being able to spend what He wants spent. Rather, I should see myself as a caretaker, a conduit. Allah basically wants to give to my children. He's just doing it through my hands. Allah basically wants to help the poor people around me. He could do it himself, but he's given it to me so that I can then become the conduit to do it. And that creates another test for me to see how much am I going to recognize him as the source and myself as just a means, and how much am I going to use that blessing that he's given me to fulfill those duties that are going to please him, or am I going to get fooled by it and start to be stingy with the wealth that he himself has given me? All right. One last thing about, just remind ourselves what we're talking about. We're talking about where to live. So we talked about location, neighborhood, closest to a masjid, and in the middle, kind of encouragement for you all to try to do what you can to think together, put your minds together, your resources together, and think for a permanent solution. Permanent meaning as permanent as we can think, right? The first, Shi'i mosque of Charlotte, inshallah. Yeah, and then which would become a kernel for others. Because if you're going to be 5-10 minutes away from the mosque, probably one mosque is not going to be sufficient. After a couple of years, once that mosque is established, does well, does proper outreach, we have converts, we have people coming out of the woodwork that didn't ever realize, never had contact with the Shi'i community, but were maybe Shi'i to begin with. Now they start to get involved. They see it's a great place. I like being here. I like the kinds of people I'm meeting. We're doing meaningful things. They become more active, more religious. It's a snowball that starts going down the hill, and inshallah it'll grow. And then as today is so full, your mosque will eventually be very full, and then you'll have to break off. Not as a fight that we can't get along, so we're going to make another mosque, but we're too big. So it makes sense now to have number two, a branch of our first mosque, and then we work together and we have 2 different locations, but we coordinate everything together, and then it keeps on growing from that.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Then we talked about affordability, and we talked about size, and how actually size is encouraged. If it's conscious, if it's for the right reasons, because you need it, because your family is growing, to make your family comfortable, and for guests and parents, these kinds of things, then increasing the size of your house is actually a very good thing, encouraged. One last thing I want to talk about is, think about the layout of your house and kind of what the focal point of your house is. That's also something very important that Islam has some things to say about. Islamic principles have something to say about. So if you think about the layout of many homes, you think about your own, oftentimes what's the focal point? Like you have a sitting room, what's the focal point of the room? A TV screen probably, flat screen TV, something like that. In many instances, that's kind of the center of the room. That's the main entertainment source of the house, right? That should also be, we should think about that. Don't just do it because that's the way it's done and that's just the normal way a room is set up and a house is set up, right? We shouldn't just automatically buy into these things, right? It's a shame sometimes I'll go to someone's house to speak with them or in a casual party and the TV will be turned on as though that's part of the conversation. So we're all sitting around, the TV's now on, playing nothing in particular, and we're trying to speak over the TV because it's too loud. No one's listening, no one's watching, but it's just kind of, it's supposed to, I guess, be a natural background noise that kind of fills the silence so nothing feels awkward. And it's a very strange dynamic. And if we just think and realize that I don't need that TV on, right? I don't want to talk to you, that's what's valuable, right? Just make it so that the qibla of our house is not our TV. Make the qibla of our house the qibla, make the qibla of our house the other things that are meaningful, right? Not devices. Again, that same advice that Allah gave, or the same kind of instruction that Allah gave to the dunya, it applies very much to our devices. And let our devices be our servants, let us not be the servants of our devices. And it's very, very easy to let your kids, or even let yourself. I mean, we model things. Sometimes you say it's the kids' problems, but it's adults' problems as well. If the adults are not careful with how they interact with those devices, then that reflects on the kids, and the kids also will follow suit. And so if you see your kids obsessed with their devices, obsessed with different kinds of games that they provide, entertainment they provide, then look within yourself and see how have you managed that? Have you been doing something that they're modeling, or have you been modeling something that they're not following? Or at very least, even if you haven't been doing it yourself, have you not played your role in being responsible and guiding them on how to use these things as tools to real life and not as the object and the goal of life? And that's so important. It's such a huge distraction from our life, our activities, where we feel like we don't have enough time. As it is, time is short. And then if we let our time be sucked up by devices and the activities that those provide, which are in many cases mindless, then the small resource we do have of some free time, instead of using it for things that are really beneficial, which will have some effect on us, a positive effect on us in our graves and on the Day of Judgment, we end up wasting it, squandering it. Inna al-insana lafi khusr, right? It's a losing battle already against time. Every moment gone is a moment that we've lost, and the only way we can salvage it, the only way we can climb back up, is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, by believing firmly and then doing good deeds, deeds that will avail us on the Day of Judgment, will have some value in Allah's eyes. If we don't, even if we, that verse doesn't even say just don't do bad deeds. And bad deeds aside, even if we just don't do neutral deeds, if we do deeds that are useless, that have no value, even that's a loss. We've lost. If we do a deed that's not beneficial, then we've lost. It's like we're taking dollar bills out of our wallet and just flushing them down the toilet. Right? That's the reality of our situation if we don't use the resources in the best possible way. Recite with Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Okay, let's take a few minutes for questions on the topic of today's lecture or the previous lectures, not just on general questions. We'll have inshallah time for general questions on the day of Ashura.
For Jama'at, if you do it at like your house, how many people is recommended?
Yeah. So for Jama'ah, how many people do you need? Just two.
Just two?
Yeah.
Or more?
Yeah, at least two. Yeah, so husband and wife can do it, a parent and child can do it. It doesn't have to be an adult even. A parent and a child who's not even baligh or baligha, they can pray Jama'ah. It's highly recommended, especially right now as a temporary solution until you get a proper mosque. Right? When there's not a program here where you can pray Jama'ah together, at least at home, make this a main kind of a central feature of your home dynamics. Fajr, everyone's at home. Right? Generally, Fajr, everyone's at home. Wake up your kids, everyone pray Jama'ah together. And then for Maghrib and Isha, and those three prayers are highly recommended in a hadith. Dhuhr and Asr are hard because people are at work. Even at the time of the Imams and the Prophets, people would be out of their fields. It would be hard for them to stop everything, come back, trek in 5-10 miles into the city to pray. So there wasn't as much, they did it, but it wasn't as emphasized as the Jahri prayers, the ones you say out loud. Those are highly recommended. There's one hadith I came across that says that Fajr in particular is highly recommended because it's one of those prayers that's very hard on the munafiqeen. And that applies not only for people who are true hypocrites, but even us and our weakness. Right? How hard is it to wake up for Fajr in the first place? Now to wake up a couple minutes earlier and make it to the masjid, it becomes very, very challenging. Only the people who are really, really serious about it are going to do it. So this becomes a huge test and a challenge for all of us to say, I want to be amongst those people, those few people who make it to Fajr prayer at the mosque. But you can do Jama'at prayers at home. That's where you can train your kids and yourself. Like sometimes we ourselves might be tempted to try to delay it, not do it right on time. Get one of those alarm clocks, right? You might have it on your computer, your phone, or whatever. We have these nice alarms. There's one by what's called Ghadir, and there's one called Najaf. Those are two brands I know. They're really nice alarm clocks, and you can program them and all of that. And then you have allowed adhan being played in your house every day. It reminds your kids, and it becomes an automatic sort of a thing that you just do. Sisters?
I remember you saying that a mosque can't be sold and it has to still be there until the Day of Judgment.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do the teachings say anything in regards to people who destroy them, like ISIS? What do they say what's happening? Or is there any protocol for necessarily in Saudi Arabia furnishing mosques and tearing down things and building them better?
Okay, so she's asking about destroying mosques. So you can always destroy it to renovate it or to rebuild. That's not legally a problem. What the Saudis doing, what the problem with it is not that they're rebuilding, but they're using that as a way to wipe out things, wipe out history, cover up things. That's the problem. The renovation is great. I mean, even in the Shi'i places, Imam Rida's shrine now. Think of what it is now and what it was before the revolution, and It was never like this. Imam Hussein's shrine, all these different places. Masjid Kufa is under construction. It's actually been renovated recently. It's beautiful now. I'm sure it wasn't like that a couple of decades ago. Masjid Sahla, which is an important place for us as well, is right now being renovated. Right, so renovation is not the problem. What the Saudis are doing is evil for other reasons. So that fits within the laws for a waqf. As long as you are destroying, a waqf is the endowment of the mosque. So as long as you are destroying it in order to build it again, or you're going to use those same resources for the same cause, then that's fine.
Just a little thought in regards to when you mentioned that, of course, when we are interacting with our Sunni brothers and sisters, in regards to, of course, not praying behind them, and I mean those type of detailed, fiqhi issues that we need to be concerned about. But when we just speaking out, let's say right now you're on the microphone and you may go on the YouTube, and then let's say your Ahl Sunnah brothers and sisters are listening to that we are praying by them, but we're not doing iqtidah. That may create a little bit of, mistrust. So do we need to be concerned about that? So, I mean, should these things be among us and not to be mentioned to them? Or what?
The problem is, how can we make it amongst us? I mean, what opportunities do we have for this kind of education? One of the kind of bittersweet parts of Ashura and these commemorations is this is the one time, mashallah, we have 100 and some people here. If I just said we're going to have a class on prayer, how many people would have showed up? But because it's for Imam Hussein, because there's so much reward for it, everyone's come. And by the way, I'm going to offer some lessons as well. So we have to take it where we can get it. It's more important for us to know the rules. Let's deal with the PR separately. That's important, but we need to know the rules ourselves. If I encourage everyone to go to Sunni mosque and everyone goes to Sunni mosque, they pray wrong, and they think they're praying in Jama'ah, and everything, their prayer becomes batala. That's much worse.
And this is good, what I'm just saying, but should they hear it? That's what
that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is that we should be guided. We could be as considerate. There's no problem with this. I've had the same. They have the same rules for us. They have the same rules for us. If it's a Shi'i imam, are they gonna either they won't pray behind him, right? Or I don't know if they do how they'll justify, but they have to have some sort of legal justification. And inevitably, we have to have that. And we shouldn't be so concerned about that. I know sometimes we feel bad about learning the rules for najasa, for instance, that people who are kuffar, who are not Ahlul Kitab, according to most Maraja, are najas. But if you look at Hindu Brahmins, for instance, they consider us najas. It's not. I mean, that's not something unheard of that we're somehow calling them, saying something bad about them. This is the reality. They're because of the faith that they hold, the faith that they've chosen to hold. That's so far from revealed religion, monotheism, they are not impure. That's just the reality of it. Right. Let's do maybe 2 more questions. Tassim?
So I was going to actually just make a comment. I moved to the Carolinas 24 years ago, and I remember moving to Columbia, South Carolina initially, and then to Charlotte here, and how small the community was, and the being real pioneers at that time. And I think a lot of the people that moved here were very enterprising and wanted to build a community in Columbia and then in Charlotte again. And to see this come to fruition here is really heartwarming. Furthermore, I went to Asheville a couple of days ago to see a small town like Asheville, North Carolina, to have a masjid there and to have a community, not a Shia community, but a Sunni community there. It's nice to see how Islam has really fled throughout the United States. And I hope the next generation will continue to actually, through their actions, their behaviors, the way they live, spread Islam further throughout North America and beyond, such that we have small communities, small pockets of it. And that's really enterprising. And that's really, in many respects, it's really pioneering for us. So it's great to see.
Not to put a dapper on that, but one of the things we need to be careful as we do that is to also be very much concerned and connected to knowledge. Right? So you'll find very quickly, if you haven't already realized it as a community, is that you can only go so far without some strong guidance from a learned person. And that's really important. As Shia in particular, we have this incredible legacy of scholars and scholarship laid down by the Imams themselves. And we need to make sure that we stay connected as a community to scholars, to maraja, and to local scholars as well. Yeah, and take it seriously as a challenge that we need to either bring in people, stay connected to people, have someone involved on a deep level with your community who can advise you and make sure that your development is in a way that's in keeping with Islamic ideals and goals. That's really, really important as you grow. One last question.
Can the mosque and the Adha Khana be the same place?
Yeah.
But if we have all these, can this be a mosque also?
You could decorate the mosque. Yeah, you could decorate the mosque in this way for the season. That's perfectly fine. If they're not, as long as they're not images, we want to stay away from images. I don't know if there are. Sometimes some of the, like the horses and stuff, those should not be there. Even at home, that's always one of the things to think about with decorations. Wherever your prayer room is, don't have photographs and these kinds of animals, these kinds of things there. It's makruh to pray in a place where those kinds of things are present. It's not haram, but it's makruh. Statues and these kinds of things, stay away from those, especially in the prayer area. Even in general in your house, try to stay away from it, but especially in the prayer area. So in the mosque also, you decorate it in a way that's appropriate. We have guidance for that as well. Simplicity is the key. White walls and there's guidance for that as well. Inshallah, when you get to that stage, then you can consult on someone who can help you with the architecture and the design of how to make your mosque. Instead of reading the Masa'ib, what I want to do, I found a very beautiful poem a few years ago. There's a scholar by the name of Sheikh Ali Abu Talib from California. He writes very beautiful poetry, and this one, I think it does the job of the Masa'ib. Why we cry. Don't think our cries are too extreme. There's good reason for men to scream. Our actions aren't of those insane. We weep in memory of Hussein. When the guilty kill the innocent to establish false government, why should a Muslim not cry in pain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. Reflect on Hussein's flawless name. Reflect on Yazid steeped in shame. Shall not my heart be drowned in woe when Islam's caliph is Islam's foe? Oh, what a dark, sad thought to hear. It breaks the heart, moves eyes to tear. That's why our tears fall down like rain. Hussein, 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 Hussein. A heart of stone's too hard to cry. A mind that's closed won't wonder why. A foolish man is deaf and blind. A coward always stays in line. But a soul that prostrates on its face, with trembling heart to seek God's grace, won't hide from truth, can't hide the pain. Hussein, 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 Hussein. The caliph chose deceit and lies. Hussein chose death, not compromise. The prophet's son would not bow down, preferring death to being bound to evil Hind's satanic son. So through his death, the Imam won. Islam's loss was Islam's gain. Hussein, 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 Hussein. Oh, what a brave and selfless deed to give up life for Islam's creed, to sacrifice both friend and kin, to show the world Islam from sin. Are you confused which side is right? How would you stand if called to fight? Are you aware just who was slain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. The foremost of the garden's youth was murdered by a drunk uncouth. My friend, understand this scene, an angel murdered by a fiend who held the Ummah's reins, a womanizer half insane, condemned to death the chaste Hussein, 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 Hussein. A Nimrod in Islamic guise, a bastard son mixed truth with lies, an ummah fooled by sleight of hand. One raised his voice, one dared to stand. An Abraham who chose the flames, rejecting falsehood's gilded claims. An Abel who opposed a Cain. Hussein, 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 Hussein. How could a demon rise so high to cause the Prophet's son to die, to kill him with a Muslim sword in the name of that Prophet's Lord. Can might make right and rule God's deen? Then how did things become so obscene? How will we remove the stain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. They wouldn't let Hussein's men drink, and now they will not let you think. They barred them from a river clear. They bar you now from knowledge dear. They fill your mind with gadgets and games. They sap your will and make you lame. Why should a Muslim not feel pain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. Yazid became the Muslims' head. Why wasn't the head Hussein instead? Did Ahmad not teach Allah's will? Then why are Muslims confused still? Who is Abraham and who's Nimrod? Who's with Satan and who's with God? Is the truth not clear and plain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. Why do we let vile demons lead and close our eyes when martyrs bleed? Oh, what a sad, sad thought to bear, that Muslims think that foul is fair. Why do they let the Satan rule and let themselves be Satan's tool? Did Ahmad's grandson die in vain? Hussein, 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 Hussein. The world's a Karbala, a desert dry, and the Qur'an's a river flowing by. Where's Abbas with what we need? His canteens pierced with shafts of greed. Our thirst is not from lack of rain. Hussein, 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 Hussein. Though martyrdom gave Abbas wings, our pain remains and grief still stings. But tears alone won't slake our thirst. Tears alone just make things worse. But tears alone won't slake our thirst. Tears alone just make things worse. Who will stand? Who will try to speak the truth, to stand, to die, to cause a tyrant's moon to wane? Hussein, 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 Hussein. O Allah, bless Muhammad's soul and shower peace on his household. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa alihi.
Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdillah. وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين